March 15, 2019, the Carmichael Museum of Ancient History. One of the most secure buildings in the country. 73 cameras, motion sensors on every floor, armed guards on rotation every hour. And yet, at exactly 3:47 in the morning, something impossible began to happen. The security system just stopped. Every camera, every sensor, every electronic lock, all dead. And in that moment of darkness, $23 million in priceless artifacts vanished into thin air. The FBI launched the biggest investigation in the city's history. They checked every security company employee, every museum staff member, every known art thief in the country. Thousands of suspects, tens of thousands of hours of investigation. They never found a single lead. And that's because they were looking in all the wrong places. 200 miles away, behind 15-foot concrete walls, razor wire, and armed guard towers, 4 men sat in their cells. Convicted criminals, locked away from society, stripped of their freedom, their rights, their futures. But what the world didn't know was that these 4 men had just accomplished the impossible. They had planned and executed a perfect heist without ever leaving their prison cells. They had turned their captivity into their greatest advantage. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, the money was gone, the artifacts were sold, and the truth was buried so deep that it would take investigators 3 years to even begin to understand what they were dealing with. The story of how 4 inmates beat the system, outsmarted the FBI, and proved that the most dangerous criminals aren't always the ones on the outside. Meet Marcus Webb, 42 years old, former military intelligence officer turned cybersecurity expert, convicted in 2015 for orchestrating a digital heist that stole $18 million from cryptocurrency exchanges, sentenced to 25 years in Blackstone maximum security prison. But here's what makes Marcus different from every other inmate in that facility. Marcus didn't see prison as the end. He saw it as an opportunity. Because while everyone else was counting down the days until release, Marcus was counting something else entirely. He was counting weaknesses. You see, Marcus understood something that most people never consider. Prison is supposed to cut you off from the outside world. No internet, no phones, no contact except through monitored visits and censored mail. It's designed to isolate, to contain, to control. But isolation works both ways. Think about it. When you're in prison, people stop watching you the same way. Society assumes you're neutralized. Law enforcement assumes you're out of the game. You become invisible in a different way. Not because no one can see you, but because no one believes you're capable of doing anything meaningful anymore. Marcus realized this about 6 months into his sentence, and that's when he started to plan. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed a team. Not just any team, he needed specialists, people with skills that when combined could accomplish from behind bars what most criminals couldn't pull off with complete freedom. His first recruit was in the cell 2 doors down, a man named Vincent Caruso, 47 years old, former art dealer with connections to black market collectors all over the world. Convicted of fraud and trafficking in stolen antiquities, 15-year sentence. Vincent had something Marcus desperately needed. Buyers. People who would pay top dollar for stolen historical artifacts and never ask questions. People who lived in countries without extradition treaties. People who collected treasures not to display, but to hide. But Vincent was bitter, angry. He'd lost everything. His gallery, his reputation, his fortune. And for the first few months, he wanted nothing to do with anyone. He kept to himself, read books in 7 languages, and waited for his appeal that would never come. Marcus spent 3 weeks studying Vincent before he ever said a word to him. He watched how Vincent carried himself, how he analyzed everything, how he noticed details other inmates missed. And Marcus knew Vincent wasn't just smart, he was strategic, patient, exactly what he needed. Their first conversation happened in the prison library. Marcus sat down across from Vincent with a chessboard. Didn't say anything, just started setting up the pieces. Vincent looked up from his book, stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then, without a word, he moved a pawn. They played in complete silence for 40 minutes. Marcus won, but barely. When the game ended, Marcus leaned forward and said something that would change everything. "What if I told you that you could get revenge on everyone who put you here and make $50 million in the process?" Vincent didn't react, didn't blink, just stared at Marcus with those calculating eyes. Then he said something unexpected. "I'd say you're either crazy or brilliant, and in here, there's not much difference between the two." Marcus smiled. "Good, because what I'm about to propose requires a little bit of both." That night, in a place where every conversation is monitored, where guards patrol every hour, where privacy doesn't exist, Marcus and Vincent began to communicate. Not with words, not with notes that could be intercepted. They used something far more sophisticated. Chess moves. Every piece, every position, every strategy represented coded information. To anyone watching, they were just two inmates passing time. But in reality, they were building the foundation of a heist that would stun the world. The third member of the team was perhaps the most unlikely. His name was David Chen, 28 years old, computer engineering prodigy, convicted of hacking into government databases and selling classified information. 30-year sentence. David was brilliant, but he was also reckless, young, impulsive. He'd gotten caught because he couldn't resist bragging about his exploits online. He'd left a digital trail that led straight to his door. In prison, David was miserable. He was the youngest inmate in their cell block, and he hadn't adapted well. He got into fights, he violated rules, he spent more time in solitary confinement than in general population. But Marcus saw something in David that no one else did. Potential. Raw talent that just needed direction. And Marcus was very, very good at providing direction. The approach was different with David. No chess games, no subtle recruitment. Marcus waited until David got out of solitary after a 2-week stretch, and he walked right up to him in the yard. "I hear you're the guy who hacked the Pentagon from a laptop in a coffee shop." David turned, defensive, ready for confrontation. "Who's asking?" "Someone who thinks you wasted your talent getting caught. Someone who thinks you could do something truly legendary if you stopped being stupid and started being smart." David's expression shifted, curiosity replacing hostility. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus glanced around, making sure no guards were close enough to hear. "How much do you know about museum security systems?" David's eyes widened slightly, and just like that, he was in. But there was still one more person they needed, the most important person, the one who would make the impossible actually possible. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and she wasn't an inmate. Sarah was a corrections officer at Blackstone Prison, 34 years old, 10 years on the job, clean record, good reputation, trusted by everyone. She was also drowning in debt. Medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment, student loans, a mortgage on a house that was worth less than she owed. She was working double shifts, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing her health, and still falling further behind every month. Marcus knew all of this, not because he'd researched her, though he had, but because Sarah had made one critical mistake. She'd complained about it to another officer within earshot of the inmates during a cell inspection. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Tom. I'm working 70 hours a week, and I'm still 6 months behind on my mortgage." Most inmates wouldn't have paid attention, but Marcus was always listening, always watching, always collecting information. He spent 2 months observing Sarah, learning her patterns, her routes, which inmates she talked to, which ones she avoided. He noticed that she was kind but professional, that she followed the rules but wasn't rigid about them, that she was tired, stressed, and right on the edge of breaking. Perfect.
The approach had to be careful, subtle. One wrong word, and she'd report him, and the entire plan would collapse before it even began. Marcus waited for the right moment. It came during a late-night cell check. Sarah was alone, doing her rounds. She stopped at Marcus's cell, shined her flashlight in, did the count. As she was about to move on, Marcus spoke quietly. "Officer Martinez, I know this is inappropriate, and I apologize in advance, but I need to tell you something important." Sarah stopped, turned back. Her hand instinctively moved closer to her radio. "What is it, Webb?" "There's an inmate in C Block planning something that could get people hurt, including officers. I don't want to be a snitch, but I also don't want anyone getting hurt." This was calculated. Marcus knew that establishing himself as someone who cared about safety, who would warn her about danger, would build trust. Sarah's expression changed. "Who? What are they planning?" "I'll give you details, but not here. Too many people can hear. Tomorrow, during library time, if you're working that shift, I'll tell you everything." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be there." The next day, Marcus gave her information about a real threat. Another inmate who was planning to assault a guard during a transfer. The information was accurate, detailed, and it prevented a violent incident. Sarah was grateful. She thanked Marcus, and from that moment on, there was a shift in their dynamic. She saw him differently, not just as inmate number 247893, but as someone who had helped her, someone who had protected her colleagues. Over the next month, Marcus gave Sarah 3 more pieces of useful information, small things, but each one accurate, each one valuable, and each one building more trust. Then, during a quiet moment in the library, Marcus made his move. "Officer Martinez, I need to talk to you about something personal, and I understand if you can't help or if you need to report this conversation, but I'm asking you to just listen." Sarah should have walked away, should have reported him immediately, but she didn't. She listened. "I know you're struggling financially. I know about your mother, the medical bills, the debt, and I know that no matter how hard you work, you're never going to get ahead. The system isn't designed to let people like you succeed." Sarah's face went pale. "How do you—" "I pay attention, and I'm not judging you. I'm telling you this because I might be able to help you, really help you. Enough money to pay off every debt, take care of your mother, and never have to work a double shift again." "You're insane." "Maybe, but think about it. You'd never be directly involved in the actual theft. You'd never touch anything stolen. You'd simply facilitate some communications and look the other way at the right moments. That's all. That's conspiracy to commit robbery. Only if anyone ever finds out, and they won't, because we're smarter than that." Sarah walked away. Didn't say yes, didn't say no, just left Marcus standing there, knowing he'd planted a seed. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Sarah wrestling with her conscience, her desperation, her fear. 3 weeks of looking at her bank account, her mother's medical bills, the foreclosure notices. Then, one night during a late cell check, she stopped at Marcus's cell and whispered 4 words. "Tell me the plan." And with those 4 words, the impossible became possible. The plan was elegant in its complexity. It required perfect timing, absolute precision, and a deep understanding of both technology and human psychology. Here's what most people don't understand about modern security systems. They're not designed to prevent all crimes. They're designed to make crimes difficult enough that most criminals won't bother attempting them. But if you have enough time, enough knowledge, and nothing to lose, almost any system can be beaten. The Carmichael Museum's security was state-of-the-art, installed just 3 years earlier at a cost of $4 million. 73 cameras networked through a central server, motion sensors with redundant power supplies, pressure-sensitive floor panels, locks controlled by encrypted digital keys. But there was a weakness. There's always a weakness. The system required regular maintenance, software updates, hardware inspections.
and that maintenance was performed remotely by a security company called SecureTech Solutions. Every month, a technician would log into the system from their office, run diagnostics, update software, and log out. David Chen knew about companies like SecureTech. He'd exploited dozens of them before getting caught, and he knew that the weakest point in any security system isn't the technology, it's the people who maintain it. Give me access to a computer for 30 minutes, and I can own that entire security network, David told Marcus during one of their coded conversations, speaking quietly while pretending to exercise. But that was the problem. David was in prison. He had no access to computers, no access to the internet, no way to execute the hack that would make the heist possible, unless they got creative. This is where Sarah's role became crucial, not just as someone who could look the other way, but as someone who could physically facilitate what they needed. Blackstone Prison had 12 computers in the education center. They were locked down, monitored, and inmates could only use them for approved education programs. No internet access, no external storage devices, no way to do anything except take online courses through approved platforms. Except that wasn't entirely true. David explained to Marcus that those computers, while isolated from the general internet, were still connected to the prison's internal network for administrative purposes, and that network, in turn, connected to the outside world through the prison's administrative systems. It's like a door inside a door inside a door. Each door has a lock, but if you have the right keys, you can walk right through. The problem was getting those keys, and that required something incredibly dangerous. Marcus needed Sarah to smuggle in a small USB device, something that looked harmless but contained sophisticated malware designed to create a bridge between the isolated computers and the prison's administrative network. Sarah's hands shook when Marcus gave her the details. This was different from just looking the other way. This was actively participating in a crime, bringing contraband into a secure facility. If she got caught, she wouldn't just lose her job. She'd end up in prison herself, possibly in the same facility where she used to work. I can't do this. Yes, you can, and you will, because you're already in too deep. You've already had conversations with me that could end your career. The only way forward is through. It was a threat, disguised as encouragement, and Sarah knew it. 3 days later, she brought in the device, hidden in her lunch bag, passed through security scanning that she knew how to navigate. She waited until David was in the education center for his scheduled computer time, walked past his station, pretended to drop her pen, and then the moment she bent down to retrieve it, she pressed the USB device into David's hand. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds.
David waited 30 minutes before inserting the device into the computer's USB port. The malware activated immediately, invisible to the monitoring software, creating a hidden pathway through the prison's network. Over the next 2 weeks, David used his scheduled computer time to build a bridge to the outside world. He couldn't access it directly, not without triggering alerts, but he could set up an automated system that would activate later at a specific time and execute a series of commands. It was like planting a bomb with a timer. You set it up, walk away, and wait for it to explode. While David worked on the technical side, Vincent was handling the equally crucial task of finding buyers for the artifacts they were going to steal. This presented its own unique challenge. Vincent couldn't make phone calls to his black market contacts, couldn't send emails, couldn't meet with anyone except through approved, supervised prison visits. But Vincent was creative, and he understood how to communicate in code. He began writing letters, seemingly innocent letters to old colleagues from his art dealing days, letters about museum exhibitions he'd read about, articles he'd seen, his opinions on various pieces of art and their historical significance. To anyone reading these letters, including the corrections officers who screened all inmate mail, they seemed like nothing more than an art dealer sharing his passion with friends on the outside. But embedded in those letters were coded messages, specific pieces he mentioned, dates he referenced, names he dropped, all of it communicating to his contacts exactly what was going to be stolen and when it would be available. One letter in particular went to a collector in Switzerland, a man Vincent had done business with before, a man who asked no questions and paid in cryptocurrency. The letter read, I've been reading about the Carmichael Museum's new exhibit on ancient Persian artifacts. Particularly fascinating is their 3rd century ceremonial dagger and the set of gold burial masks from the Achaemenid period. I imagine those pieces will be worth approximately $23 million at auction, though of course they'll never be sold publicly. Such a shame that great art is locked away where only a privileged few can appreciate it. I often think about March, how it's such an underrated month, the 15th specifically. Something about mid-March has always felt significant to me, like a turning point. Anyway, I hope this letter finds you well. To a casual reader, it was rambling, nostalgic, the musings of an imprisoned art dealer missing his old life. To the Swiss collector, it was a detailed message, the specific artifacts that would be available, their estimated value, and the exact date they would be stolen, March 15th. The response came 3 weeks later, a letter that talked about how the collector agreed about March being underrated and how he'd always wanted to visit certain private collections in various countries. Hidden in that response was confirmation. The buyer was interested. Funds would be ready. Everything was falling into place, but the most complicated part was still ahead: the actual heist. Remember, the team was in prison. They couldn't physically go to the museum, couldn't scope it out, couldn't recruit outside help without risking exposure. So they had to do something unprecedented. They had to recruit their thieves without ever meeting them, without knowing their names, without any direct contact. This is where the plan became truly brilliant. David's malware wasn't just going to disable the museum's security. It was going to send instructions, detailed, step-by-step instructions, to people who didn't even know they were about to become thieves. The target wasn't professional criminals. It was the museum's own cleaning crew. Stay with me here because this is where it gets incredible. The Carmichael Museum, like most large institutions, outsourced its cleaning to a contractor company. That company employed 30 people who worked night shifts cleaning the museum after it closed to the public. These were regular people, no criminal records, background checked, trusted with access to every room in the building. What David discovered through his network infiltration was that the cleaning crew used an app on their phones to clock in, receive their nightly assignments, and report when tasks were completed. Standard modern workplace stuff. But that app connected to a server, and that server had vulnerabilities. David's malware was designed to do something extraordinary. At exactly 3:30 a.m. on March 15th, it would take control of that app on 4 specific employees' phones, employees who David had identified as having the right combination of access, schedule, and lack of technical sophistication to question what was happening. The app would then send them instructions that looked like they came from their supervisor, detailed instructions about a special security drill happening that night. The messages would tell them that as part of this drill, they needed to follow specific procedures, go to certain display cases, use emergency override codes that would appear on their screens, remove specific items and place them in containers that would be provided. They would be told this was a test of emergency artifact evacuation procedures, that security was watching and timing them, that they needed to move quickly and efficiently. To these employees who trusted their employer's app and had no reason to question unusual instructions from their supervisor, it would seem legitimate. Strange maybe, but legitimate. And here's the truly devious part. The malware was simultaneously disable all the security cameras and alarms. So from the security company's perspective, it would look like a system failure. From the cleaning crew's perspective, they were following orders. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the artifacts would be loaded into a van that was actually waiting in the loading dock, driven by someone who had received similar fake instructions through a compromised logistics app. No one would know they'd participated in a heist. They'd all believe they'd been following legitimate workplace procedures. It was manipulation on a scale that seemed impossible. And it all had to be orchestrated from inside a prison cell through a chain of automated commands without any possibility of adjusting the plan once it was set in motion. The night of March 15th arrived. Marcus, Vincent, and David were in their cells. Sarah was on duty, working the late shift, her heart pounding so hard she thought other officers might hear it. At 3:30 a.m., 200 miles away, 4 phones belonging to museum cleaning crew members simultaneously received messages. Urgent, emergency security drill in progress. Please proceed immediately to your assigned stations and follow all instructions exactly. This is a timed exercise. Security is monitoring, your cooperation is essential. The employees, confused but compliant, read their instructions. Maria Santos, who had cleaned the museum for 6 years, received instructions to proceed to the ancient Persian exhibit. Use the emergency case release code that appeared on her screen. Remove 3 specific items and place them in the blue container by the service elevator. She did exactly as instructed. James Mitchell, working his usual overnight shift, got orders to access the Byzantine art section. Different codes, different artifacts, same process. Across the museum, 4 employees, all believing they were participating in a drill, systematically removed $23 million in priceless artifacts and loaded them into containers. The security system remained dark, every camera offline, every alarm silent. At 4:15 a.m., a van that had been scheduled through the museum's logistics system arrived at the loading dock. The driver, who had received what he thought was a last-minute pickup request from his dispatch, loaded the containers and drove away. He believed he was transporting empty archive boxes to a storage facility. The work order on his tablet said so. He had no reason to question it. By 6 a.m., when the museum's day shift arrived and the security system mysteriously came back online, everything seemed normal. The cleaning crew had finished their shift. The exhibits looked untouched. The cases were still closed, still locked. It wasn't until 10:30 a.m. when a curator went to photograph one of the Persian artifacts for an upcoming catalog that anyone realized what had happened. The case was empty. The artifact was gone.
The police arrived, then the FBI, and then the investigation that would consume thousands of hours began. But by then, the artifacts were already on a private jet, heading to Switzerland. The cleaning crew employees were at home, sleeping, with no idea they'd just committed the robbery of the century. The van driver was on his next delivery, and in Blackstone Prison, 200 miles away, Marcus Webb was playing chess with Vincent Caruso, just like he did every morning. When the news broke on television, shown on the common room TV, Marcus watched with the same expression of surprise and interest as every other inmate. "Can you believe that?" another prisoner said. "23 million stolen from a museum. How the hell did they even do it?" Marcus shook his head. "I have no idea. Must have been an inside job." And he moved his queen, capturing Vincent's bishop. But the story doesn't end there, because while the heist was perfect, no crime is ever truly perfect, and there's always someone who sees what others miss. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to David, was assigned to the case. She'd spent 15 years working art theft, and something about this heist bothered her from the beginning. The technical sophistication suggested organized crime. The precision suggested professional thieves, but the execution was sloppy in ways that didn't make sense. The cleaning crew employees all passed polygraph tests because they genuinely believed they'd been following orders. The van driver had legitimate work orders. The security system failure could have been a glitch. Every lead evaporated, every suspect cleared. It was frustrating, impossible, almost like someone had planned it specifically to leave no trail. Agent Chen spent 6 months reviewing every detail, and then she noticed something so subtle that every other investigator had missed it. The malware that had infiltrated the museum's security system, it had a signature, a specific way it was coded, and Chen had seen that signature before. 3 years earlier, in a case involving cryptocurrency theft, a hacker named David Chen, who'd been convicted and sent to prison. She pulled his file, read about his skills, his methods, his arrest. And then she saw where he was incarcerated: Blackstone Maximum Security Prison. It seemed absurd. How could someone in prison possibly orchestrate a museum heist? But Agent Chen didn't believe in coincidences. She dug deeper. She requested visitor logs for David Chen, phone records, mail, everything. Nothing suspicious. David had barely any contact with the outside world. A few letters to his mother, 1 approved video call per month, no visitors except his lawyer. Dead end. But then Agent Chen started looking at other inmates at Blackstone.
other people with skills that might be relevant, and she found Marcus Webb, former intelligence officer, cybersecurity expert, convicted of financial crimes, and Vincent Caruso, art dealer, black market connections, trafficking in stolen antiquities. 3 inmates, 3 separate cells, all with exactly the skills needed to pull off this heist. But still, how? They were in prison, monitored constantly, no access to technology, no way to communicate with the outside world effectively. Agent Chen spent another year investigating, interviewing guards, analyzing prison security protocols, reviewing hours of surveillance footage from inside Blackstone. And then she found it. A correction officer named Sarah Martinez, who'd made several unusual administrative decisions in the weeks before the heist, who'd authorized David Chen's computer time at odd hours, who'd been in certain locations at certain times that didn't match her official routes. Agent Chen pulled Sarah Martinez's financial records and discovered something interesting. 3 weeks after the heist, she had paid off her mortgage, paid all her mother's medical bills, deposited enough money in her bank account to live comfortably for years. The source of funds? A cryptocurrency payment from an anonymous account. Agent Chen had her. She had the connection, the proof that someone inside the prison had facilitated the heist. But proving it in court would be nearly impossible. The cryptocurrency trail was designed to be untraceable. The evidence was all circumstantial. Marcus, Vincent, and David had been careful to never communicate directly about the heist in any monitored conversation. Agent Chen brought Sarah Martinez in for questioning. 17 hours of interrogation. Sarah never broke, never admitted anything, claimed the money was from an inheritance, had paperwork, forged but convincing, to back it up. Without a confession, without physical evidence, Agent Chen couldn't make an arrest. The case went cold, officially unsolved. The artifacts never recovered, the money never traced. But Agent Chen knew. She knew exactly what had happened. She knew who was responsible, and she knew she couldn't prove it. 3 years later, Marcus Webb came up for parole. His behavior in prison had been exemplary. He'd taken classes, helped other inmates, caused no problems. The parole board reviewed his case and granted him early release. Vincent Caruso was released 6 months later. David Chen still has 12 years left on his sentence. He's teaching computer programming to other inmates, model prisoner, keeping his head down. Sarah Martinez still works at Blackstone Prison, still takes care of her mother, still lives in the same house, now fully paid off. The $23 million in artifacts? They hang in a private collector's vault in Switzerland, never to be seen in public again. The cleaning crew employees? They still don't know they committed a robbery. They still believe it was a security drill that somehow went wrong. And Marcus Webb? He lives in a modest apartment in Chicago, works as a security consultant, advises companies on how to protect themselves from cyber threats. He's never been charged with the museum heist, never will be. But here's the thing that keeps Agent Chen up at night, the thing that makes this story truly terrifying. Marcus Webb is writing a book about security systems and how to exploit them, a book filled with detailed case studies, hypothetical scenarios, and theoretical heists. One chapter is titled The Prison Paradox: How Isolation Can Become Opportunity. Agent Chen received an advance copy in the mail, addressed to her personally, with a note. "Thank you for your persistence, Agent Chen. You came closer than anyone else, but as you know, almost isn't the same as success. I hope you find this book educational. Perhaps it will help you catch the next person who tries something like this. Though I doubt there will be a next person. After all, this particular approach only works once. Now that you know it's possible, you'll be watching for it. Sincerely, Marcus Webb." Agent Chen read that note 17 times, looking for something, anything, a confession, a hint, a mistake. But there was nothing, just a polite message from a man who'd beaten the system so completely that he could taunt her without consequence. She opened the book, started reading, and on page 247, she found a chapter that detailed step by step exactly how 4 inmates could theoretically plan and execute a museum heist from inside a maximum security prison. Every detail matched the Carmichael Museum robbery. Every technical specification, every manipulation, every clever trick. But it was all presented as fiction, as a thought experiment, as a hypothetical scenario that could never actually happen. The publisher's disclaimer at the beginning of the book made that clear. All scenarios presented in this book are fictional and for educational purposes only. Agent Chen closed the book, and for the first time in her career, she smiled at a criminal's audacity. Because Marcus Webb had committed the perfect crime, and then he'd written a confession that could never be used against him. Today, if you visit the Carmichael Museum, you'll see empty display cases where those Persian artifacts once stood, plaques that read, "On loan to private collection," even though everyone knows that's not true. If you visit Blackstone Prison, you'll see inmates going about their daily routines, taking classes, playing chess, seemingly cut off from the world.